Welcome to the Primitive Camping and Bushcraft podcast. I'm your host, Chris Spear. So here we're going to talk about gear, grit, and the kind of stories you only get around a fire. It's all about learning, adapting, and keeping your faith strong. So whether you're a seasoned outdoorsman or just looking to unplug and reconnect, you're in the right place. So pull up a chair by the fire and let's get into it.
A question comes along every so often that makes you just really think and reformat everything, I guess, to say in your mind. It helps you to reformat everything in your mind. So the question was, George, a member of the group, Primitive Camping and Bushcraft, made a post, and he said, if modern backpacking gear is lighter, stronger, and more comfortable, what is the point of bushcraft? So I read that post when it first posted it, and I was like, oh, let's sit back, let's pop some popcorn, and let's watch the fireworks go. But to my surprise, that didn't happen and didn't come to fruition. So I can honestly say that I'll give you a little backstory here. You know, he had just completed a survival course out in Arizona. And during that course, he carried around 50 pounds of equipment. Later, he hiked similar country with about 20 pounds of modern backpacking gear. And that got him to thinking, and he asked a simple question. If modern gear is lighter, stronger, more comfortable, and easier to use, then what's the point of bushcraft? Boy, I could hear the fireworks taking off on that one, son. I'm telling you right now, whenever I first read that post, I was like, what? Oh, no. And I sat back, and as they piled in, comment after comment after comment after comment, and that is what we're going to discuss today. So, like I was saying, the comments started pouring in. Some people said bushcraft is all about learning traditional skills. Others said it's about using whatever equipment works best. Some thought bushcraft and survival were basically the same thing. Others argued they were completely different. A few people even wondered if bushcraft had become nothing more than a way to sell expensive, old-fashioned gear. That was pretty good. And the longer I read through these comments, the more I realized that George wasn't really asking about backpacks, knives, tarps, and ferro rods. He was really talking about something much bigger. Like, what are we really trying to accomplish when we head into the woods? And I think that's a question that is very much worth digging into on this show, this episode, on this podcast. So, as I did before, last week, we talked about the backpack and how many different camps. There were 4 different camps. This week, we're going to break it down again into separate camps. So as I read through all the comments, I noticed several different camps beginning to form. And the first group believed that bushcraft is all about knowledge. Every bit of it is about knowledge. All bushcraft is about knowledge. It wasn't about the gear that they carried. It was understanding, knowing how to find dry tinder after 3 days of rain, knowing how to choose a safe campsite, knowing how to read the weather, knowing how to solve problems when something goes wrong. And that group kept coming back with the same idea. Knowledge weighs nothing. Then there was another group, a second camp. They leaned heavily towards traditional equipment. Now, traditional equipment, guys. canvas, wool, axes, cast iron, leather, flint and steel. You know, those 6 items are just an example. But, you know, for them, bushcraft is as much about preserving old skills or older skills or an older set of skills or older lifestyle or way of life as it is about enjoying the great outdoors. So these particular set of people, this particular camp of individuals likes to slow down and enjoy. You know, they enjoy slowing down, making things by hand, you know, like spoons and stuff and chairs and, you know, mallets and, you know, just making things out in the landscape. They like using methods that generations before us depended on every single day. And that's one thing worth thinking about, is that a lot of these older skills that we utilize in bushcraft, primitive camping, survival type situations, is essentially skills that were used daily years ago, 100, 200 years ago. Not so much 100 years ago, but now it's getting closer to 250 years ago. For instance, you know, America's celebrating the 250 years, or just celebrated 250 years this past weekend. And, you know, 250 years ago, you had to know these things. You had to know how to bushcraft. You had to know how to live off the land and go out there, or your life, I mean, essentially your life depended on it. So the third group had a much more practical approach. Their attitude was rather simple. If modern gear works better, use it. Plain and simple. For instance, carrying a big lighter. If modern gear works better, use it. Carrying a sleeping bag that weighs, I have a down stuffed waterproof sleeping bag. It's really not a sleeping bag, it's more of a blanket. And that thing is immensely hot. And it's so hot I hardly ever use it. And it really keeps you warm. But it's lighter than a traditional sleeping bag. It's lighter than a wool blanket. And it is waterproof. I mean, hello. So if you could walk further, if you can sleep warmer, and you could carry lighter gear, then what's up? You spend more time enjoying your trip instead of struggling because you're trying to prove something. And that's one of the things that I wrote down here, because a lot of bushcraft is people trying to prove a point. I can go out into the woods and suffer through this and survive. Yeah. But a lot of individuals will disagree with that, and I understand. A lot of people will go out into the woods and like ease their way through it because they know how to do these certain things. And then there was another camp that really caught my attention, another group. And these folks, they kept saying the same thing over and over. Bushcraft is not survival. I believe I was one that posted that in that comment. You know, bushcraft is not survival. Survival is something that you hope never happens. And bushcraft is something you choose to practice. I really did smile whenever I saw those comments, because a lot of that is exactly how I explained it in the book, Primitive Camping and Bushcraft. And on page 10, right there, Bushcraft and Survival. And it wasn't really popularized until all these TV shows started coming out. Of course, you had the 18th century reenactment type stuff where people would do that. And it's one thing, but, then you had groups of people that would go out camping and minimalistically on purpose. Survivor Man, Dual Survivor, those were some of the first TV shows. And then Naked and Afraid Alone, it just started taking off from there. It was several different TV shows and stuff. And that's what really popularized survival. And then people started grouping bushcraft in with survival, because if you're out doing this quote unquote survival stuff or bushcraft, then you're surviving. So I don't know. I will leave that up to you guys to decide. But I don't think George was asking whether a titanium pot is better than a steel pot. I really don't. And I don't think he was asking whether a big lighter is better than a flint and steel. But what I'm really thinking he was asking is that if modern equipment can do the job better, then why should we spend so much time learning the old ways? And honestly, realistically, that is a relatively fair question. It's one every outdoorsman ought to ask himself sooner or later, including myself. I ask myself all the time, why am I doing this? I used to go out and rough it and eat freeze-dried foods and stuff that I just caught and cooked, and, I could still do that. If we're honest, there are very few of us who would choose to sleep in wet wool when we have a very quality sleeping bag or waterproof blanket back at home, or to choose from, or to bring with us. It's very few of us would actually choose that. Realistically, I'm speaking realistically here. Unless you're choosing to do it just so you can say, I did it. A lot of people wouldn't do it on purpose. Now, hold on here. I'm probably going to ruffle some feathers. And a lot of folks is like, dude, really? But you got these schools that teach you these older ways, these classes that you go and take for bushcraft, survival, and stuff like that. And I get it. They're actually teaching you things that you can do. But let me tell you, there's only so many things that you can learn. Each school starts rehashing the same old stuff. It's like videos. All right. Let me put this into perspective. Once you've done so many bushcraft videos that you could think of, that's it. After that, you're starting to rehash them. Take a look on the interwebs, on the Googles, and I can promise you'll find 500 different people making videos of the same subject. It's the nature of the outdoors business. Essentially that's what it turned into. It turned into a business. It's a business of suffering is what it is. It's a business of suffering. Now, some of you will disagree. That's fine. That's fine and dandy. You go out there and suffer through a survival course, a bushcraft course, or something to that effect. And once you get done with it, you retain the knowledge. So it goes back to group number one, comes down to knowledge. So it's by choice. Very few of us would turn down a dependable water filter just to prove we know how to boil water. Yes, you could just scoop it right out of the river, and yes, you can boil it, and yes, you can drink it. You can go ahead and do that. There's nothing wrong with that. when it comes down to filtering nasty, looks like sewage, you know, a lot of us would, instead of just boiling it and drink it, we're going to try to find a way to filter it out to make it a little bit cleaner. That's all you're doing, is trying to make it a little bit cleaner, a little less gritty, a little less nasty. So very few of us is going to refuse a reliable flashlight just because lanterns existed 100 years ago. So with that type of mindset, where does bushcraft fit? Honestly, we just discussed it just a second ago. The answer starts with something I wrote in the book. I separated camping, primitive camping, bushcraft, and survival because they're related. They're all related, but they're not all the same thing. Camping is for recreation. All right? Plain and simple. Camping is for recreation. Primitive camping removes many of the conveniences that we rely on ourselves if we go camping. Bushcraft is developing the knowledge and the skills to live comfortably in the great outdoors using the resources that's all around us. For some folks, that'll be going into the woods with a knife and a handkerchief, or going into the woods with a knife and the clothes on their back, and, you know, making a city. Survival is an emergency. And I don't know how. Survival is an emergency. If you're in what they call a quote unquote survival situation, that is, some kind of accident happened. Something, you got lost, an accident happened, you got shipwrecked, you blah, blah, blah. That is a survival situation to where that next 3 days, 72 hours, whatever it is dependent upon what you do. How you practice your bushcraft in that 3 days is going to determine how you come out, your outcome, your survival. So one is a choice, one is not. That's why I don't believe bushcraft is about rejecting modern gear. I believe it's about refusing to become completely dependent on it. And that's a big difference. So that's why I wrote the book the way I wrote the book. I wrote Primitive Camping and Bushcraft in a way to inform a person that has little to no experience, or some experience, but they didn't understand what all do I need to bring with me to go on my camping trips, or my primitive camping trips, or I want to load a backpack, head out into the woods, and enjoy my time in those woods. That's what I wrote this book for. It outlines the gear you can, and it gives you an informed decision for you to select and pick what kind of gear that you want to take with you into the great outdoors. So over the years, I've gone through just about every phase that I can possibly imagine when it comes down to what gear and stuff like that. I have been in the camp of way too much gear, and I think we've recently talked about that. Boy, my nose keeps itching. I have carried too little gear, not enough. I've bought equipment because somebody, and I have still suffered through this, that a YouTube personality has, hey, you gotta have this, it's awesome. And they make it look like, yes, that I gotta have one of that. I gotta have that. That was awesome. And they make you think that you have to have this particular piece of gear to go on your next trip. And it really hindered me, because I learned how to use that gear, and then come to find out I really didn't need to use that gear. I really didn't need it. I've also gone into the woods with cheap equipment just to have the stuff break. And there's plenty of you out there that know all about that. But I've also gone out into the woods with plenty of cheap gear and proved that you don't have to spend a fortune to enjoy camping. And what I really learned was that gear was never the lesson in this. The gear was not the lesson. It may have been the question, what gear are you bringing? But the trip was always the lesson. The trip, every single trip taught me something. Every single trip that you go on will teach you something. And sometimes like I discussed last week, it'll teach you that you brought too much. It'll teach you that you brought too little, or you left behind something that you really should have brought. And then sometimes it teaches you that, hey, that expensive piece of gear wasn't any better than the cheaper version. And that seems to be a lot of the answers that I'm getting on my recent trips, is that you do not have to have that $240 piece of gear when the $40 piece of gear that's just like it is just as good. Now, the situation that I have had happen to me is that a lot of this gear that I'm using, I will move on to the next phase. I don't need that gear no more. So I ended up spending too much money on this gear, and that was cool. That was great, but it's not something I'm going to bring with me every time. And then next thing you know, I mean, if you're doing this like I do, and you're just shooting YouTube videos on gear and bushcraft and survival and just outdoor gear in general, and you're doing review videos, and you have companies calling you all the time saying, can we send you a piece of gear? And I'm like, sure, send me a piece of gear and I will put it through the paces. Half of the time, I don't even do a video on some of this stuff because I would not recommend it to my in-laws. I probably said that wrong because I really do care about my in-laws. But I wouldn't recommend it to anybody. I wouldn't recommend it to nobody. And if I wouldn't use it, I'm not going to show a video on it for you guys, you know. So this gear, after a while, starts piling up. And your trips become fewer and fewer. And you get more and more gear. And next thing you know, you walk in there and you look like a hoarder, because you've been hoarding gear that you really don't need. So every single trip has to teach you something. Every single trip. It's going to teach you something about your gear. It's going to teach you something about your backpack. It's going to teach you something about your sleeping bag. It's going to teach you something about your underwear that you wear. That sounds silly, but it's the truth. You wear the wrong pair of underwear, and guess what? You're chafed. that's a reality right there. Sometimes these things are going to teach us, these trips are going to teach us that we pack too much. Sometimes it's going to teach us that we left behind stuff we should have brought. And it's going to tell us that that expensive piece of gear wasn't any better than the cheaper stuff. And I believe I just went over that. And that's why I have a pencil to mark off what my bullet points. So knowledge can solve problems. Equipment never will. And that is a very good idea right there, is that knowledge can solve problems that gear or equipment never will. Looking back through many years of stuff, when I was getting into this and I was really starting to develop all my skills, I can remember saying, oh, a better knife. I need a better knife. I need a better knife. I need that $120 knife. And I'd order it. I need a better backpack. That's $100. I'll order it. Oh, man, look at that stove. I need a better stove. I'm going to order a better stove. $150. I need a better lantern. I need a better this. I need a better that. And one day I look around and I realize something. None of the stuff that I spent that money on is in my camp. And that is the wake-up call. Because if you're spending that much money on gear and you don't even use that gear, you don't practice that gear, you don't even bring that gear with you, you don't add to the knowledge in your nugget, that is a wake-up call. Because it's telling you have what they call gas gear acquisition syndrome. And that is a real thing, man. Don't get me wrong, guys. Don't get me wrong. I really do. I like good equipment. I really do. I like good equipment. And if something works better, something lasts longer and makes my trip more enjoyable, I'm interested from here on out. But I've reached a point where I don't buy something just because it's popular. I don't buy stuff because it looks cool. You know, there's all kinds of cool gadgets that come out every week. Check YouTube. That one guy, what's his name? I forget his name, but anyway, he's always got the latest gadget. He's always showing off the latest whatever it is. And dude, you don't have to have the latest gadget when you're going out into the great outdoors to take a camping trip and take your kids camping, to teach them something, to put the tablets, the phones up, to learn more about the outdoors and identifying trees and identifying, you don't have to have the latest and greatest. Morris Kohansky, and this quote came up several times within that group, in that discussion, says, this quote came up several times. The more you know, the less you carry. The more you know, the less you carry. And I agree with that. And a lot of people agree with that statement. And it's the truth. But I also think people understand what he really means. So I don't think he was saying your goal is to carry the smallest backpack possible. I don't believe that. So I think he was trying to say that knowledge creates options. And I'm not trying to put words in his mouth. God bless him. God rest his soul. But I believe that he was seriously saying the more you know, the less you carry, is you have options. And I talk about it all the time on this podcast. I talk about it all the time in this book. I talk about it all the time on the Facebook group. That everything that you see, everything that you put up here gives you an option of what gear to bring, what gear not to bring. And, you see it through several of the other survival instructors, bushcraft instructors throughout these schools all over. And there's tons of them. There's a bunch of them, members of this group, Facebook group on primitive camping and bushcraft. And they teach the knowledge that you need. They show you some skills that you learn, and they teach you how to do certain things that you can add to your memory banks up here. If your lighter quits working, another way. If your water filter breaks, another way. And bushcraft isn't about replacing equipment. It's about making sure equipment isn't your only plan or your only option. That is the thing that bushcraft is. And that is what he's talking about. The more you know, the less you carry. Because you don't have to carry 5 different water filters. You don't. Everything that he had fit in a 2-quart pot. Every bit of it. So, go figure that. And that was a jacket too. Modern gear helps us do things more efficiently. All right. Bushcraft teaches us why those things work in the first place. Traditional skills passed down through generations, through books, through, whatever. Think about a fire. If you carry a big lighter every trip, why? Have you ever asked yourself that? Why do you carry a big lighter with you every trip you go? Because it's reliable. Because it's fast. Because it's simple. Because it is the most advanced, cost-effective way to start a fire in everybody's pocket in modern history. All right. Everybody has a means to start a fire, and they carry it in their pocket, and it's not a flint and steel. So, but hold on. I still practice my ferro rod. I still know how to use a flint and steel. I still know how to make a bow drill and have practiced it numerous times, even this year. I can still take natural tinder, and I can still enjoy the primitive methods if I want. But I can start a fire with that big lighter. And if that big lighter breaks or you lose it, I know how to start a fire with other means off the landscape. And one of the simple things with that is because your big lighter is going to fail. It will fail. It's not a question of when or how. It's a question of when. It is going to fail. Equipment is not going to replace your knowledge. It's going to make it more convenient for you. It's going to build upon your knowledge. And I really do think that we should approach bushcraft with, is this going to supplement my knowledge? Yeah, there we go. Something like that. I'm making that up as I go. You can enjoy both. You can learn traditional skills. You can enjoy both. You can learn traditional skills. You can get out there and you can bring as much gear as you want to do it. But there's no rule that says you have to choose one over the other. You can go and enjoy it. I had a commenter on a post where some young individual was saying, hey, I've never done this before, and I don't know what to bring. Can someone please tell me what I need to bring for a 3-day trip? I'm going camping this weekend for 3 days. And somebody said, if you have to ask that, you don't need to go camping. Plain and simple. I was like, what? I couldn't believe my eyeballs when I read that. Here you are in a position to help somebody else out, and you're going to be a smarty pants like that. That blew my mind. So that individual is no longer with us in the group. He is enjoying other groups. Yeah. So here's something I want everyone listening to do. Ask yourself these 5 questions. Do I know how this piece of equipment works? Could I accomplish the same task another way? Have I actually practiced that skill? Am I carrying this because I need it or because somebody else told me I needed it? Finally, if this piece of gear disappeared tomorrow, what would I do? Those 5 questions will tell you more about your bushcraft skills than anything else. If you answer those 5 questions and you write them down honestly, it will actually help you in your bushcraft adventures. So something else stood out to me as I read through George's post, and the longer someone had been camping, the less interested they seem in arguing. So the more years someone had spent pounding the ground, the less interested they were in debating with people. The younger campers were debating all kinds of brands. The older campers were talking about lessons. And I thought that was very interesting because some men commented had been camping for 40 or 50 years. And they weren't trying to convince everyone that their knife was better. They weren't arguing over the color of the tarp somebody should buy, but most of them were simply sharing what had worked for them. And that really did tell me something. The experience has a way of sanding off all the rough edges. When you got plenty of experience under your belt, it is really going to make your trips more refined. And when you're new at this, we think there's only one right answer, and we saw it on YouTube or we read it in a book. And then you go out camping and life really does humble you. That's happened to me. I can't even tell you how many times that's happened to me. You ever reached in your bag and you forgot your rain gear? What about you had an awesome supper, you were trying to film a video, and you burned it? I did that. I was on the phone with one of the members of this group way out in the middle of nowhere, and I burned my biscuits so bad that the dog wouldn't eat them. Now, you ever had a dog not eat a burnt biscuit? And I was looking so forward to that. It was a homemade biscuit. It was about this big around, and golly, I was so ready. It was almost a loaf of bread, biscuit bread. Every mistake that you make in the great outdoors turns into a lesson, something for you to learn by. Bushcraft really does begin whenever we start learning these lessons and we start developing our knowledge. You don't have to just go to a class to start developing knowledge. You go outside and just let the outside be the class. It's not going to start when you buy a piece of gear. You have to learn how to use that piece of gear. You have to learn how to use that axe. You have to learn how to sharpen that axe. You have to learn how to sharpen your knife. And before long, you're going to quit worrying about looking like an outdoorsman and start concentrating on becoming one. You're going to stop trying to look like the YouTube personality that you're watching all the time, and you're going to start looking like an outdoorsman. I read an article today, a very well-known survivalist with a British accent was being accused of, filming and then sleeping in hotels. And I'm like, whoa, hold on. This dude, I saw him build his camps and he stayed in his tents. And there's another one, a couple of them from Canada. And, it's just crazy how you got all these people that are so well known that they make enough money doing this that they don't have to worry about, they just do it for the image. They just do it for the looks, the likes, the money, the whatever, and then they just, they really get off base. They get way off base. So, real bushcraft is going to begin with the knowledge of how to use your gear. It's going to begin with the knowledge of how to actually get out into the woods and figure out how to tie these knots, how to make cordage, how to make a tripod, how to hang a hammock, how to set your ridge lines. You know, that's where all your knowledge is going to come from, is that getting out there and doing it. There's no wrong way, but you got to learn how to do it. You still got to take the test. If you become a student of the outdoors, the woods are going to become your classroom, and every trip is going to teach you something. And little Rusty here is going to he's going to bark in the microphone the whole time. Little dude. So every trip's going to teach you something. Every failure is going to teach you something. Every single failure, man, let me tell you, if you failed at something, you'll be like, I will never do that again. And I can promise you, you will always remember that. Don't compare yourself to somebody else. I tell that to the beginners, the boys that I mentor. I tell them all the time, do not compare yourself to somebody else. Do not compare yourself to somebody that's been doing this for 30 years, because you're not going to do it the same way. This guy can make it look like that's the easiest thing in the world. And I was teaching the boys how to use ferro rods and start a fire. And I could go over there with one strike and start a fire, and they would sit there in 40, 50 strikes because they were holding it wrong. And every time I tried to show them, they were like, no, I got it. And you know, they were doing it wrong. But you can't compare yourself to somebody else that's been doing it for 30 or 40 years. You got to compare yourself to who you were last month, last week, last year. Looking at me 10 years ago to me now, and it's like night and day. You know, it's complete night and day. Can you build a better fire? Can you tie another knot? Do you know several knots? Or do you just use the same ones over and over? Can you sharpen your knife a little bit better? A little bit sharper? Can you identify another tree or another plant? Can you choose a better campsite? If you can answer that with a yes, you're moving in the right direction. That's what bushcraft is. Not perfection, but progress. As I was thinking about George's question, my mind kept going back to what Abram in the book of Genesis, Abraham, before his name was changed, and God told Abram something that almost sounded like unbelievable, something familiar. It's like, leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you. And the thing about that was, you know, if you think about it for a minute, Abram didn't climb into a air-conditioned truck. He didn't unfold a road map. He didn't have a GPS. He was a nomad. He lived as a nomad. He moved from place to place, and he had to find his water. He had to find grazing land for all his animals. He had to protect his family, and he had to know when to move camp. He had to understand the land around him, and every single day required wisdom and understanding to that nature. But what I really find interesting is God didn't remove Abram's responsibility to make good decisions. God gave him a direction, and Abram still had to walk. He still had to work for it. God gave him a promise, and Abram still had to live each day with wisdom. And I think that's what a lesson is for the outdoorsman, for us as survivalists or bushcrafters or primitive campers. You know, sometimes people act like faith and preparation are opposites, but they're not. You know, Noah still built the ark. Joseph still stored up grain for the famine. David still practiced with the sling long before he faced Goliath. And faith does not excuse us from learning. Faith gives purpose to what we have learned. So I want to thank George for asking this question, and I want to thank every member of the Primitive Camping and Bushcraft Facebook group that took the time to leave a thoughtful comment. because discussions like this are exactly why this community is here. And it's why we continue to grow. You know, we're not just collecting gear. We're collecting knowledge, and we're learning how to apply it in the great outdoors. And one thing I really love about this community is the fact that people are starting to really get into conversation and really starting to help each other out and really starting to post pictures, and people's like, hey, I didn't do it that way, I did it this way, and they'll post their picture inside the comments, and it's starting to turn into some real good conversations. So I hope to see you there. I hope to see you join. Swing by the Primitive Camping and Bushcraft group on Facebook. Join up. There's 75,000 of us now, and I have did a little research, and it is slowly becoming one of the largest outdoor communities on Facebook. It's crazy. One of the. And it's a great time, you know. So anyway, all right, guys, thank you so much. That's enough for today. I really do appreciate it. Today we got like a almost an hour long conversation this time, and that was awesome. So I look forward to next week's episode, and I hope to see you then. Remember, these birds, I got some weird birds flying over today. They're like got a split tail. But anyway, remember, in all your ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct your paths. I'll see you next time. God bless you.